Have you ever spent hours trying to make your training more engaging, but the more you tweak it, the less confident you feel? Like you're going around in circles, and as you go, you're less and less clear how you're going to take this dry content and make it into an experience that people actually enjoy? Well, I can totally relate. When I got started as an instructional designer, I was struggling to engage learners, so I left and became a video game producer. And what I learned in that industry is that games are nothing more than training experiences. You fail, you persevere, you try again, and you learn by doing. But because they have to work, like they have to be effective, because otherwise people will quit, they teach the way we actually learn, not by exposing us to a ton of information, but by making us discover and perform the right actions right from the start. And I find that instructional designers know that this is the right way in theory, but in practice it can be hard to apply sometimes, while game designers have had to find ways of applying this principle of human learning. I don't know, maybe it's because games are never mandatory, but in any case, they've developed a ton of tactics to get people to figure things out without ever realizing that they're learning. So when I went back to instructional design, I took those game tactics and I turned them into a step-by-step instructional design framework that I could use to get that same effective engagement but in e-learning, and it works for any topic. So that's the process I'm going to walk you through in this video so that you too can stop second guessing yourself and start making decisions you're confident about in the right order and start building training that people actually enjoy. So let's get started. The first step is what I call step 0 because it happens before you design a single activity or select a single piece of content to include in your course. Before you can do any of that, you've got to figure out what you're trying to accomplish. And you need to go way deeper than just writing learning objectives. So this is essentially a streamlined version of action mapping, and it goes something like this. First, you get crystal clear on what your overall goal is. For example, this training will decrease customer complaints by 20%, increase sales by X%, or reduce the onboarding time for new chefs from 1 month to 1 week. Whatever you choose, it needs to be observable. Find some behavior you can see or some real-world change that will tell you your course worked. Now, I know some of you are not too concerned about real-world effectiveness. What you want is to make training that people enjoy. And I get that, but the way to engagement is through effectiveness. If you don't have activities that aim at something real and relevant, if you're too focused on fun, you're going to have more headaches all the way through. It'll be harder for you to make the right design decisions, justify those decisions to other people, and to the learner, your training is going to come off as kind of a gimmick. So come up with an observable real-world goal. That's the needle you're trying to move. Then ask yourself, in order for this to happen, what do people need to actually do? Not what do they need to know. We don't care that they know the principles of food safety. We care that they apply it in the real world under real pressure. So you brainstorm all the behaviors that need to happen for this needle to move, and you break them down into their component steps. And then for each behavior, you ask, why aren't they doing it already? What are they missing? Usually it's not information. People usually know what they're supposed to do in theory, but in practice, something gets in the way. I don't know, maybe they're rushed or they have conflicting priorities, whatever. We need to know what that obstacle is so that your program actually trains them to overcome that obstacle in the real world. If they really are missing information, you can include it, but most of the time people are missing practice or they just need to train in the presence of the obstacle. Once you have all that, you have an action map that tells you exactly what you need to include in your program and most importantly, what to cut, what to leave out. Any content that's relevant but doesn't substantially contribute to this end goal should go. That way your program is concentrated impact and it never wastes any learner's time. And armed with that, you can start the design process starting with step 1, cognitive mechanics. This is where you're going to design the actual challenges that make up your training, the problems that learners are going to solve so that they discover and practice the right way to do things. The idea behind this is that you practice the actions from the start, you see what happens, you try again, and you get better and better each time. As you repeat this loop, your skills increasing and you can take on harder challenges. Games really are the one place where failure and immediate feedback is an intended, continuous part of the experience. And that's much closer to how we actually learn. So in this step, you take every major skill in your action map and you design strings of challenges that are going to take learners from being a newbie to an expert in that skill. The way we do that specifically is we start by designing the hardest version of that challenge, this one right here. This is a test that an untrained newbie cannot pass. If an untrained newbie is able to pass my final challenge, then it's not a good enough representation of the real world because otherwise they could do it in the real world. But there's 2 more reasons why we make this final challenge hard. Number 1, It forces you to aim at a level of mastery that people don't already have. In other words, your course is actually going to give people new skills. And two, if you're aiming high, it's impossible for you to just give them information because that's just not going to be enough to change behavior. So you design this final challenge, you build a playable version of it, and then you use that as your custom template to make the entire learning string. It'll start with easier versions where learners have a ton of guidance, all the way to real-world final difficulty where the guidance is gone and they have to remember the right things to do. In this case, what the 4 ingredients are. All the way through, the learners putting 2 and 2 together. You're giving them the pieces so that the answer is discoverable. Now, this is a real mindset shift because as instructional designers, we're trained to explain. But cognitive mechanics are asking you to do the opposite, to set up the learner so that they figure it out for themselves. It's a shift, but when learners arrive at information through their own effort, it's going to be way stickier than if they're just handed the information. So you do this for each of your major objectives, and once you're done, you have all the activities that your learners will have to do. Not read, not watch, do. Now you've only completed step 1 here, but you'll already see a dramatic impact in both learner engagement and behavior change because you've completely shifted the way you teach to match how people actually learn. The next step is macrostructure. I can't say that word. The next step is macrostructure, and here we build the path that connects all the challenges that you've built, the learner's journey from beginning to end. But this is about a lot more than just putting things in order. Macrostructure has 2 main components. Number 1, there's the shape of your path. So depending on what you need, you can use linear bits, branches, optional side quests, or sandboxes where the learner gets to decide in what order they do things. If you use a combination that mirrors the structure of your content, it can make your content easier to remember. And the second ingredient of macrostructure is the gates. That is, what conditions must the learner meet before a challenge or a section opens up? The most basic one is, of course, if you want to open a challenge, you need to pass the previous one. But there's a lot more different types of gates, like accumulate a certain number of successes in a sandbox before you can move on. Gates make sure that your learners have to demonstrate mastery before they move on, of course, but using the right one can help you match your requirements more specifically. Sometimes people just need an overview of all the topics, but sometimes they need to go deep on some other topics. And you don't always have to figure out how you're going to get them to do that through content. Sometimes the structure itself can do that work for you. So by the end of this step, you have a roadmap so you can stitch all your activities together and have a program that's playable from beginning to end. Okay, step 3 is motivational mechanics. The problem with most gamified programs out there is that they start here. They don't rethink the way they teach and assess the learner. But it's important to realize that if you follow the steps so far, you've already built most of the motivation in your program. You haven't used a single reward yet, but you're giving learners something meaningful and achievable to do all the way through. And when they're solving relevant problems at a difficulty that feels real, motivation naturally kicks in. So at this point, the intrinsic motivation is already built in, and the goal of this step is to amplify that. And we do this in 2 ways. 1, you design ways to track, display, and celebrate every bit of their progress so that the momentum you've created is salient and visible to them. The clearer you are about where the goal is and where they stand with respect to that goal, the more likely they are to reach that goal. Plus, at this point, you can add more intrinsic motivators like curiosity, letting learners glimpse what's behind the locked sections so that they're pulled towards it, or agency, like giving them hints that they can earn and spend where they see fit. Or you can tickle their completion instinct by adding collections and showing them what's missing. These are all elements that multiply the learner's drive to complete those strings of challenges that you did in your cognitive mechanics. But none of this works if the structure itself is passive. Like if you have walls of text and you reward them for clicking next, that's meaningless and they know it. And then we come to step 4, which is difficulty balancing. So a lot of people feel uneasy about making a training program challenging. They agree that it should feel like a gym, but they worry that if it's too hard, some learners are going to get left behind. Well, that's why we have challenge balancing, to make sure that the level is just right for each learner every step of the way, even when the learners are not all at the same level. I've said it before, but in the real world, you don't get to decide what they have to do and how hard that is. Your learning objective determines that. Whatever the desired end state is, your course has to scaffold up to that point. So balancing difficulty is almost never about changing your content to make it easier or harder. It's much more about adjusting the numbers. Time limits, number of decoys, number of attempts, acceptable margins for answers. These are all levers that you can use to tune the difficulty on the fly, and because they're all numbers, you can tie them directly to the learner's performance so they'll move according to how each person is doing. If you struggle on one loop, the next loop gives you more leeway. But if you crush it, On the next loop, we're going to tighten the screws. That means that your newbies don't get left behind, but your masters don't have to slow down for them either. So you're not wasting anyone's time. You're just giving each person what they need without having to build different versions of your program for different skill levels. In traditional e-learning, there's a real temptation to soften everything down to the lowest level so that everyone passes, but that means that your average learner never really needs to build skill to pass the test because it's too easy. Challenge is your friend. It's what leads to engagement and effectiveness, but it does need to be well managed. And you do that by keeping everyone in their Goldilocks zone of, yeah, I can do this, but it's hard enough that I have to apply myself. In other words, I have to engage. Step 5 is presentation. By now, you've worked hard to design an experience that requires mental effort. The last thing you want is for that effort to be spent on figuring out how to navigate the program. Every second the learner's wondering what to do or how well they're doing is a second they're not spending solving the right problem. So the job of presentation is to make all of that as automatic as possible, and we do that in 2 major ways. Number 1, eliminate confusion. Learners need to know what their goal is, their rules, how well they're doing, and how to input their answer at a glance. They shouldn't have to read to understand any of that. If your playtest reveals that people are confused, the answer is almost never add more text. Clear symbols, animations, and sounds are usually way more intuitive and automatic. So rethink the interface so that it can only be used the way it's intended. And second, increase player comfort and confidence. So this is about fostering trust with the user by making them feel safe to try things. When they know that a mistake isn't final or they can change their mind and the system gives them every chance it can to get it right, they relax and it's easier to enter flow and try more things and solve more creatively. The better you take all the stress and the cognitive load away from the interface, the more your challenges can actually do their work of changing behavior. When learners are fully present and focused, they can work hard on exactly the right things. And the final piece of the puzzle is the wrapper. So this includes the visuals, the colors, the fonts, the style, the sounds, and sometimes even the story. The goal of these elements is to set the mood and the tone for the experience, but to be honest, as long as your presentation is clear, the wrapper doesn't affect learning outcomes all that much. And the good news is, because this has very little effect on learning outcomes, you do have enormous creative freedom when it comes to the wrapper. You can make the surface look like whatever serves your audience best. If your client would be put off by anything that looks gamey, you can have your motivational and your cognitive systems running completely under the hood, but the surface is clean and corporate. The game elements are still there and they'll still work, but the learner just won't see them. And for a lot of designers, it's tempting to start with this or even worry about it too early, but I say resist that temptation. Of course, you can share mock-ups early on, but don't let this become a rabbit hole or a time suck. It's best to polish late in the process. First, because polish tends to be expensive, so you definitely don't want to be polishing things that are still in flux. And second, because once something looks beautiful, there's more psychological resistance to changing it even when it needs to be changed. So save your polish for when the activities are stable, tested, and approved. Following a system that you trust in order is how you can go from second guessing and wondering what the next step is to being able to quickly create training that you know people will enjoy and will actually make a difference. And if you're ready to start implementing this and take it seriously, make sure to grab your free consulting call with me at the link below. We'll talk through your specific situation, where you're getting stuck, and together we'll figure out what the right approach looks like for you. So I look forward to chatting with you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.